Hi and welcome. In this video I'm going to be replacing the oil seal that sits behind the countershaft sprocket on my Gilera 350 Saturno. Now to do this we need to remove this cover here and also loosen the chain a bit so we can actually get the sprocket off with the chain on. Now I'm also going to loosen the chain just to make it easier to get that sprocket off. So I'll just loosen the chain adjuster. Okay, now just using this homemade tool, I'm just going to loosen the chain off. That should be enough. Now using this hand impact wrench, I'll just loosen this nut. Now we'll just take the sprocket off. And now let's get this seal out. Now there is also an O-ring at the back here that needs to be removed. Well, the sprocket seems to be in pretty good condition, so I'll reuse this. An unusual feature of the sprocket is that the actual crankcase seal actually runs on this flange on the back of the sprocket. I haven't seen that on any other bike. Doesn't mean that no one else has used this method, but it seems pretty unusual to me. Now this surface will need to be cleaned up, so I'm just going to use a Scotch-Brite pad to just clean off any dirt or minor corrosion on that so that the seal will get a good, clean, smooth surface to seal against. You'll also notice that there's a concave cavity on the back here. There's actually an O-ring fitted to the shaft that actually sits in this cavity. That actually stops oil going down the shaft and along the splines and around the area where the sprocket is bolted on, whereas the seal actually stops it from passing the actual sprocket itself. Now the sprocket is mounted in a fairly unusual way in that the sprocket is retained by this bevel washer here. Now there's a little top hat spacer there that goes through the center of that bevel washer and a standard spring washer on top. So that just holds it on, and that's tightened up to 60 Newton meters. I've never seen this mounting method for a countershaft sprocket before. Usually you get a big nut and a tab washer of some kind to hold a sprocket on. This is fairly unusual. I have noticed that the Gilera Saturno uses a lot of these bevel washers to hold parts on shafts in it. So, you know, whether that's an unusual practice or not, I don't know. Okay, so the next task is to actually fit the seal and then refit the sprocket. Now I've cleaned out this entire area with a rag so it's all nice and clean. I've lubed up this new O-ring which I will just slip on. Next, just insert our seal, make sure that the flat face is facing out. And then to actually seat it, I'll just use the sprocket turned around the back way and just now I've applied some oil to the flange on the back of the sprocket. So we need to fit the chain to the sprocket, making sure we keep that flange nice and clean. Slide that on. Get our bolt with its bevel washer and spacers. Screw that on. You're just going to make sure that the bevel washer sits on the spacer when you do it up. If it gets caught, You may break the bevel washer if you're not careful. And finally, we torque the bolt up to 60 Newton meters. So that's the job done. Now we'll just readjust the chain. And before tightening up the adjuster bolts, you should check that the chain adjuster is the same at the same point on both sides, just to make sure that you don't have misalignment of the axle. And finally, we'll just refit the cover. Well, that was a fairly straightforward procedure. I did have a few questions myself in regards to the seal and the torque setting for this particular job, and those questions were answered very smartly on the Gilera Network forum. And if you're an owner of one of these bikes or have an interest in them, I certainly recommend you joining that forum. I'll put the link to that forum and the other Gilera forum in the description below. Well, that's it for this particular video, and I'll catch you next time.